Hey guys, Shady Chemical here from Ableton.com. Now today we are at part 2 of the series on creating a bit of a Trancy tune. You can watch part 1 for an overview of the track we're doing if you're finding this video and haven't checked it out yet. So yeah, let's jump right into it. Alright, first starting off the drums, it's a bit of a break pattern. I wanted to emulate something with a bit of a swing, but will also give a bit of a chill out feel, you know? Let's take a closer look at the kick. Now, the kick consists of two parts, the actual kick and a sub kick. If you're watching this on a laptop with regular laptop speakers, you're not gonna hear the sub kick. Now, normally I will lay the kick sound, but as I said in the previous video, I just quickly made this for demonstration purposes. Now, the kick comes straight out of the Vengeance House sample pack. It's a bit soft, bit tiny, quote unquote, which I found to be perfect for this track as I wanted a more psy-trancey kick. Now I've applied a bit of saturation to fatten it up a little bit, and I've cut away some of the EQ at the 2 kHz region. Now I thought it made the kick a bit cleaner. Now the sub kick I made with the analog synth. It's just a normal sine wave detuned by a lot, so it sounds really deep. I played a bit with the release settings and made it to have a quick release time. Now then there's the hi-hats. The hi-hat consists of 2 tracks, one with a bit of a short hi-hat sound on every 16th note. Now in Ableton Live Simpler, which is my sample of choice, I've turned the velocity to 71%. Basically what this does, it determines how much the velocity settings in the clip itself actually influence the volume. So the velocity are these purple bars in the lower portion of the MIDI clip window. You can drag them up and down to make it sound louder or softer. Now this fast hi-hat has a bit of a bandpass filter, pretty high, around 11.3 kHz. This is to make it a bit thin sounding and a bit in the background. And then there's the second hat, a bit longer, follows its own groove, has a high pass filter, pretty high, around 9 kHz. Now, both hat tracks are panned a bit to the sides. These are grouped in a separate hats group, which has a compressor to glue these two together, if you will. And with a bit of EQ on them, around 7 kHz to make them sound a bit more thin. Now I wanted these hats to not stand out in the mix, but wanted to give them a bit of the groove. I wanted to give the groove a bit of speed. Alright, now let's take a look at the cymbals. I've used the impulse effect, which is basically a sampler where you can load in multiple audio files. Each note in the MIDI clip then triggers its own audio file. I played a bit with the decay settings, as the default is set to 2 seconds and it will limit the crash sound. I also played a bit with the volume so they were all a bit equal in perceived loudness. The crash is placed on every first bar after every 4-bar loop. This to let the listener know a new loop has started. Over these cymbals I place a compressor, a bit subtle, but it gives the cymbals a bit of life and glues them together a bit. Now I filtered these with a high pass filter around 1.16 kHz so they would sit better in the mix. Also I wanted to be at the size of the listener as to free up space in the middle, so I applied a little effect with the sample delay to stereo enhance. What I did was map both channels to time instead of sync, turned up the dry wet filter to 100% and timed them with like a 50 milliseconds apart. Afterwards I applied another instance of the simple delay to give a bit of an echo effect, although very subtle. I then wanted to make these cymbals a bit more thinner as well, so I applied some EQ. Around 1 kHz, 5 kHz, where in my opinion the sounds were too dominant. Also a bit of reverb in the end, medium decay time. Then there's a snare sound on every second and fourth note with a bit of a groove every second and fourth measure to not to be too repetitive. The snare is just not a vengeance sample. As you may have noticed by now, I almost exclusively work with vengeance samples. I've put a compressor on the snare to make it a bit louder. This snare is then filtered through a high pass filter to make room for the kick and other bassy elements. How I did this is basically start from a high frequency, then letting more of the signal come through until I've caught its gushy part, you know, its lively part. To make it fit in a bit better, I've done an EQ cut at around 1.3 kilohertz. I basically listened to where the kick came out the best while sweeping across the spectrum. Now I've used the Lexicon Reverb plugin with the chamber preset with a bit of a medium decay time to really give that more spacey effect, as it was more of a trancey tune. Alright, let's move on to the second part, the build-up part. Now as you can hear, the kick is on a 4 to the floor pattern in the beginning, then slowly starts to become faster and faster. Just did this in MIDI notes by dividing the count by 2. At the end, a auto filter kicks on and then automates towards the end, where the kick is being high passed at a steadily rising frequency, just to make it dissolve. I've also added a bit of an off-bass effect using a hardcore kick from the Plutonium Boy Hardstyle sample pack. I then bandpassed this using the auto filter to give a cool effect. I was just playing around with this, I didn't really have anything specific in mind. The bandpass is slightly automated towards the end, a bit solo, but to let it go with the overall flow a little bit. I then sidechain compressed this with the kick to let it duck under the kick. What sidechain compression does is it basically takes the input of another track and uses that to power the compressor. So every time the kick drum hits, this sound is being compressed by a lot, which gives that more pumpy feeling. Again, some stereo enhancement using a simple delay to push it to the sides to give the bass some room to breathe. And lastly, some reverb as a cool effect. Then for this part, I wanted some claps on every note that would become faster towards the end. And these claps are compressed to make the tail a bit longer, also high pass to fit them better in the mix. And instead of drawing out every note, I use the beat repeat effect to give the speeding up effect. Now basically I set the interval to 1/4 and change the grid settings to 1/8 and then 1/16 and then 1/24 at the end, and then added some reverb to finish it up. Now with the cymbals, I really didn't do anything other than letting the crash cymbal announce the end of the build-up. I think crash are a great way to build tension. So yeah, that is basically the drums in this little sort of tune. At the beginning you got your break pattern, then there's a build where everything is centered around building tension, and then a 4 to the floor pattern starts speeding up and then releases. Anyway, that's it for today's pod. Stay tuned for the next part of this tutorial series, and have a great productive musical day now, and I hope to see you soon.